The sun had not yet risen, and the city was still half asleep when Maya sat alone at her small kitchen table, staring at the phone that would not stop shaking in her hand. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she did not even notice because her eyes were fixed on one single message that kept flashing on the screen. Report to HR immediately. Her heart began to race and her fingers trembled as she read it again and again. She whispered to herself that it could not be true, that maybe it was some mistake, but deep down she already knew what it meant. She had worked at the Grand Imperial Hotel for 3 long years and never once received such a message. She was always careful, polite, and quiet. She never caused trouble and always stayed late to make sure everything was perfect for the guests. But last night everything changed. She could still see the image in her mind, the crystal glass of red wine slipping from her tray, the splash across the expensive white suit of the young millionaire. Sitting by the window, everyone in the restaurant froze as the deep red stain spread across his sleeve. The whole room had gone silent, and Maya had stood there, frozen, her face pale and her hands shaking. She tried to apologize, but no words came out. The man had simply stared at her with calm eyes and said nothing. Then he turned away and continued his meal, while the other waiters whispered behind her back. She had wanted to disappear right there and then. All night she had prayed that it would be forgotten. But now this message from HR told her otherwise. She dressed quickly, her old shoes making soft sounds on the apartment floor as she walked out into the cold morning air. The streets were empty, except for a few workers starting their day. She felt small among the tall buildings that glowed faintly in the pale light. Every step toward the hotel felt heavier than the last, as if the city itself was watching her walk toward her fate. When she reached the hotel lobby, the golden lights were bright and cruel. She could feel eyes following her as she crossed the marble floor. The receptionist gave her a look that made her heart sink even lower. She wanted to ask what was happening, but no one spoke a word. She took the elevator up to the HR office, her breath catching in her throat with every floor that passed. The doors opened with a soft ring, and she stepped into the quiet hallway, her heels echoing like small heartbeats in the silence. Inside the office, 2 people were waiting, her manager, Mr. Collins, and a woman she had never seen before. Both looked serious. The woman from HR adjusted her glasses and said in a flat voice, "Maya, please sit down. We need to discuss last night's incident." Maya nodded, her legs weak. As she sat, her hands twisting in her lap, she tried to explain that it was an accident, that she would pay for the cleaning or even replace the jacket. But they did not seem to listen. Mr. Collins looked uncomfortable and avoided her eyes. Finally, the HR woman said the words that froze Maya's world. "Your employment is suspended, effective immediately." The air seemed to leave the room. Maya's lips parted, but no sound came out. Suspended. The word rang in her ears like a bell. She wanted to cry, to beg, to explain. But something inside her stopped. She simply nodded, stood up, and walked out without saying a word. Her hands were cold, her body numb as she left the office. People looked at her from the corners of their eyes, whispering softly. She walked past the lobby, past the shining glass doors, and out into the gray light of morning. Outside, she leaned against a wall and tried to breathe. She looked at the sky, wondering how everything could fall apart so quickly. She thought about her mother back in her village, about the bills waiting to be paid, about the little savings she had left. Her eyes burned with tears, but she refused to cry in public. She walked to the bus stop with her head down, the city around her, waking slowly, as if nothing had happened, as if her world had not just collapsed. She felt invisible, small, and broken. When she finally reached her tiny apartment, she dropped her bag on the floor and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall. The silence was loud. She took off her uniform, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table as if saying goodbye. Her hands brushed against the name tag that read Maya R., and she felt tears finally fall down her cheeks. She thought of the millionaire whose jacket she had ruined and wondered if he had complained, if he had demanded her firing. Maybe to someone like him, she was just another mistake to erase and forget. As night turned to dawn, she sat by the window watching the city lights fade slowly. The world felt empty, and still she thought she had lost everything: her job, her peace, her future. She whispered softly to herself, "I have been fired and there is nothing left for me." But as the first light of morning touched her face, she did not know that. Somewhere in the city, a man was making a decision that would change her life forever, and that before the next sunrise, a knock at her door would prove that not all endings are meant to be sad. Some are just the beginning of something she never dared to dream. The night had been long and heavy, and Maya could not remember when she had last felt so lost. The air in her small apartment was cold and still. Her eyes were red from crying, and her head ached from sleeplessness. She kept staring at the folded uniform on the table, the same one she had worn with pride for 3 long years now. It looked like a piece of her old life, something that no longer belonged to her. She whispered to herself that everything was over, that she would have to leave the city soon. Maybe find a smaller job somewhere far away where no one knew her name. But every time she closed her eyes, she could still see the face of the millionaire sitting in the hotel that night, calm and quiet, while everyone else stared at her mistake. She wished she could forget his eyes. They were too calm, too unreadable. The clock on the wall ticked slowly toward dawn when she finally gave up trying to sleep. She made herself a cup of tea, but even the steam felt lifeless. She sat on the edge of the bed and thought about what she would tell her mother back home. Her mother had always said, "Maya, you are strong. You never give up no matter what." But tonight those words felt like ashes. She wondered if strength even mattered when the world decided to crush you anyway. She hugged herself and tried to stop the shaking when suddenly she heard it. A soft knock at the door. At first, she thought she had imagined it. The sound was gentle, almost like someone tapping with a fingertip. She looked at the door but saw no shadow. Then it came again. 1, 2, 3. Quiet knocks, her heart skipped. She slowly stood up, every part of her body tense. She walked to the door and whispered, "Who is there?" No answer. Only silence. The hall outside was dark. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly turned the handle and opened the door. There was no one there. Only the cool air of early morning, and a single white envelope lying on the floor just inside her door. It was thick and smooth, with a gold seal pressed in the corner. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. Her name was written across the front in neat black letters, Maya, R. Nothing else. No address, no logo. She looked down the hallway, but it was empty. Only the faint echo of her own heartbeat filled the silence. She closed the door quickly, her fingers shaking as she broke the seal. Inside was a single piece of paper folded twice. The writing was neat and strong. "Meet me at the old pier at sunrise. Bring no one." The words were simple but carried a weight that made her chest tighten. There was no signature, but at the bottom of the page was a tiny gold mark, the same emblem she had seen on the millionaire's watch last night. She gasped softly, her mind racing. Could it be him? Why would he send her this note? What did he want from her? Fear and curiosity battled inside her. She looked at the clock. It was almost 5 in the morning. The sun would rise soon. She told herself it was probably a mistake. Maybe someone was playing a cruel joke, but something in her heart refused to ignore it. She remembered his calm face, the way he had looked at her. Not angry, just thoughtful. And for reasons she could not explain, she felt she had to go. She wrapped herself in her old coat and stepped outside into the cold air. The city streets were quiet. A thin layer of mist covered everything. The lights from the tall buildings flickered faintly like fading stars. She walked quickly, her hands deep in her pockets. The letter still clutched tightly in her hand as she moved closer to the river. The air grew colder and the fog thicker by the time she reached the old pier. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in soft orange light. The wooden boards creaked under her feet. The place looked abandoned but peaceful. She stopped near the edge, her breath visible in the cold air. She looked around nervously, half expecting no one to come. Then she heard footsteps, slow and steady, coming from the fog. She turned and saw a tall figure approaching, the mist cleared just enough for her to see his face. It was him, the same millionaire from the hotel. His suit was gone, replaced by a simple coat and scarf. But there was no mistaking those eyes, calm, steady, watching. Her carefully, Maya's voice came out shaky. "Why did you call me here, sir? What is this?" He smiled faintly and said, "I did not call you here to hurt you, Miss Maya. I came because I wanted to give you something. She frowned, confused. Give me something. Why me? He stepped closer and handed her a small silver card with no words on it. Just a number and the same golden emblem from his watch. He said, You think you have been fired, but perhaps it is time someone saw what you are truly worth. She stared at the card, unsure whether to take it or not. Her hands trembled as she finally reached out and held it. He said, Come to this address tomorrow at 10. You will understand everything then. Before she could speak again, he turned and walked away, disappearing back into the fog, leaving her standing there with the card in her hand and 1,000 questions in her mind. The wind brushed her hair, and she whispered softly to herself, Who are you really, and why me? As the first rays of sunlight broke across the sky, Maya looked down at the silver card again, her heart pounding faster than ever. She felt something she had not felt in a long time, not fear, not sadness, but hope, faint and fragile, like the dawn itself. She had no idea what waited for her at that address, but for the first time since yesterday, she wanted to find out, because maybe, just maybe, her story was not over yet. The night passed slowly for Maya, and the silver card never left. Her hand, she kept turning it over again and again, trying to understand what it meant. The number engraved on it shimmered faintly under the weak light from her lamp. She placed it on the table beside her bed and lay down, but her heart refused to rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the man's face, the calm expression, the strange kindness in his voice. The way the fog had wrapped around him, like he belonged to some different world. She had met rich people before, but none had looked at her the way he did, not with pity, not with pride, but with something she could not name. When morning came, she had barely slept. She dressed in her simplest clothes and tied her hair neatly. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror and whispered, You can do this, Maya. You can at least see what this is about. Maybe it is a job. Maybe it is a trick, but you will never know if you do not go. She wrapped her scarf tight around her neck and stepped out into the cool morning air, her heart beating faster with every step she took toward the unknown. The address on the card led her far from the center of the city to a quiet street lined with tall trees. The buildings here were old but beautiful, their windows covered in vines and their gates painted gold. She stopped in front of one that looked larger than the rest, a mansion with white walls and a fountain at the entrance, the sound of water mixed with birdsong as she hesitated by the gate. She looked down at the card again, and then, at the guard standing nearby. He noticed her and said softly, Miss Maya, we have been expecting you. Please come inside. She blinked in surprise. How did he know her name? But she followed him through the gate anyway. The garden was full of flowers that glowed in the sunlight, and the scent of jasmine floated through the air at the main door. Another man in a black coat waited and guided her through a grand hallway filled with paintings and glass chandeliers. She felt small and lost, surrounded by all that beauty. Until suddenly she saw him. Daniel crossed, the millionaire from the hotel, standing by a window with his hands in his pockets. He turned and smiled at her gently, as if seeing an old friend instead of a stranger. You came, he said, his voice calm and steady. Maya nodded, unsure what to say. He gestured toward a seat and she sat down, her hands folded tightly in her lap. He said, I know what happened at the hotel, and I know how it must have felt. I am sorry for how they treated you. She shook her head quickly. No, sir, it was my mistake. I should have been more careful. He smiled again and said, Accidents happen, Maya. What matters is how people handle them. I wanted to see if you would blame others or hide, but you did neither. You simply faced it quietly with grace, and that told me everything I needed to know. Maya frowned, not understanding what he meant. He continued, I am opening a new branch of my company, and I need someone to train new staff. Someone who knows what real hard work looks like. I watched you long before that night. I saw how you treated guests, how you stayed late to help your coworkers, without asking for anything in return. That is rare. Maya sat frozen, her heart racing. Was this real? Was he offering her another job? She whispered softly. Why me, sir? There are many others better than me. He shook his head and said, No, There are not many with your heart and patience. Those are things that cannot be taught. He stood and walked to a desk, picking up a folder and handed it to her. Inside were papers and photos of a large building under construction. It looked like another hotel, but different, more peaceful, surrounded by gardens and open spaces. He said, "This will not be just a hotel. It will be a place for people who need a second chance just like you, and I want you to be part of it." Her hands trembled as she looked at the papers. She wanted to cry, but she held it in. He looked at her and said, "You might think this is a gift, but it is not. It is a test, another one to see if you will trust me and trust yourself. You start tomorrow at 9. He handed her another card with the address. She looked at him, unsure whether to smile or cry. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. He nodded and said, "You have earned this, Maya." As she left the mansion, the sunlight felt warmer and the air seemed lighter. She clutched the folder to her chest like a treasure, her heart full of confusion and hope. When she reached the gate, she looked back once more. Daniel was still standing by the window, watching her with the same calm expression she could not read. She wondered if he had truly chosen her for her hard work, or if there was something deeper behind his offer. The bus ride home felt like a dream. She stared out the window, watching the city pass by. Everything looked different, brighter, alive. She whispered softly to herself, "Maybe I am not broken. Maybe life is giving me another chance." She smiled faintly for the first time in days as the bus moved. Through the morning light, she had no idea that this was only the beginning, that behind Daniel's calm smile there was a story and a plan that would soon pull her into a world of secrets, tests, and choices that would change everything forever. Next morning, Maya woke up before sunrise, her heart racing with excitement and fear. She had not felt this alive in years. The folder Daniel gave her lay open on the table, the pictures of the new building glowing faintly under the lamplight. She traced her fingers over the words "Second Chance Foundation," her mind still refusing to believe that someone like her could ever be part of something so big. She stood by the window, watching the sky slowly turn pink, and whispered softly, "Please let this be real. Please let this not be another dream." She dressed neatly in her old uniform. Even though she no longer worked at the hotel, she wanted to look presentable. Her hands shook a little as she tied her hair and checked her reflection. She saw a tired girl with hopeful eyes, someone who had been broken but still dared to stand. She took a deep breath, grabbed the folder, and stepped out into the cool morning air. The city was quiet, and the streets were bathed in soft gold. She walked toward the bus stop with her heart full of questions. What if this was some kind of mistake? What if he changed his mind overnight? But the thought of turning back never crossed her mind. When she reached the address written on the new card, her breath caught. In her throat, the mansion stood tall on a hill surrounded by trees and gardens. It was larger than anything she had ever seen. White walls glowing under the sun fountains, sparkling in the courtyard, and marble steps that led up to huge glass doors. She hesitated at the gate, afraid that someone would stop her. But the guard smiled and opened it without a word, as if he had been waiting for her. She walked through, slowly, her shoes clicking softly against the stone path. The air smelled of roses, and the sound of water calmed her shaking hands. At the entrance, she saw Daniel again, standing near the doorway, dressed in a simple white shirt and gray vest. He looked nothing like the rich guests she used to serve. He smiled warmly and said, "Welcome, Maya." She lowered her eyes and whispered, "Thank you for trusting me, sir." He shook his head gently and said, "No. Maya, thank you for showing me what real dedication looks like. Come, I want to show you something." He led her through a wide hallway lined with tall windows, sunlight streaming in and dancing on the floor. They passed rooms filled with paintings of people working together, laughing and sharing food. She could smell something delicious coming from the kitchen, but Daniel did not stop until they reached a large glass wall beyond it. She saw workers in uniforms planting flowers, painting fences, and building furniture. They were laughing, singing, working with energy and hope. Maya stared in wonder. These people, they are not normal. Hotel staff, are they? She asked. Daniel smiled and said no. They are people who once lost their jobs or made mistakes but were never given another chance. I was one of them once long ago. I built this place for them and for you. Maya turned to him, her eyes wide me. He nodded slowly. You know what it feels like to be seen as less than others. You know how to stay calm when everything falls apart. That is the kind of strength I need here." Her throat tightened. She wanted to say thank you, but her voice refused to come. Daniel continued, "You will train them. Help them learn to serve guests with care and respect, not fear. You will make this place run smoothly, and in return, I will make sure you never have to worry about losing everything again." She looked out the window, her heart overflowing with gratitude and disbelief. Tears filled her eyes and she whispered softly, "Why are you doing this for me?" Daniel looked at her and said, "Because I see something in you that the world has forgotten. Kindness." He handed her a small name badge engraved with gold letters. Maya, our operations manager, Second Chance Foundation. She stared at it, unable to move her fingers, trembling as she held it. "This cannot be real," she whispered, but he smiled again and said, "It is as real as you make it." The rest of the day passed like a dream. She met the team, toured the building, and learned how everything worked. There was laughter and warmth in every corner of the mansion. The workers respected Daniel deeply, but not out of fear. They loved him because he believed in them. Maya watched him interact with everyone, calling them by name, listening to their stories, treating them as equals, and she realized that the man she had once thought cold and distant was in fact the opposite. He carried a quiet pain behind his smile, a pain that made him understand people like her. By evening the sun began to set, painting the sky with orange and gold. Daniel walked her to the garden and said, "The official opening will be soon. But before that, there is something I must tell you. There are people who will not like what we are doing. They will try to stop it. They will think helping others is a waste. But you must stay strong. And trust yourself." Maya nodded firmly. "I will, sir, I promise." He smiled proudly and said, "Good, because this place will stand only if people like you believe in it." As darkness fell, she looked around at the glowing lamps lighting up the mansion. She felt something deep inside her shift, a tiny spark of belonging she had never known before. She thought about the night she believed her life was over, about the envelope under her door, the fog, the silver card, and now this, the miracle she never asked for but was given anyway. She looked at Daniel and whispered, "Thank you for not letting me fade away." Daniel turned toward her and said softly, "Sometimes the ones who lose everything are the ones who end up saving everything. Remember that." Maya nodded, silently, her heart full of gratitude and wonder as she walked back down the path toward the gates. The stars began to appear above her. She smiled for the first time in a long time, not knowing that this peace would not last, that tomorrow would bring a storm strong enough to test every ounce of faith she had found tonight. The next few weeks passed like a dream for Maya. The mansion came alive with work, laughter, and hope. She spent her days training the new staff, teaching them how to serve guests with care and how to smile even when they were tired. She walked through the halls each morning with a clipboard in hand, feeling more confident than she ever had before. Everyone respected her. Everyone listened. And Daniel often stopped by to check on the progress. His presence always calm, his words always kind. She began to believe that her life had finally changed for good, that maybe her bad days were gone forever. But life had its own way of testing hearts, and Maya's test came. Sooner than she expected, one afternoon, Daniel called her into his office, his face serious, his usual warmth replaced by quiet concern. He said softly, "Maya, there is something you should know. Some people are not happy about what we are building." She frowned. Not understanding, he continued, "My business partners. They think this project is a waste of money. They wanted another luxury resort, not a place to give people second chances. They have been trying to shut us down." She felt her stomach twist with worry, but she nodded, trying to stay calm. Daniel sighed and said, "They will do anything to stop this, even if it means hurting innocent people." Maya promised she would stay strong, but the next morning, everything began to fall apart. She arrived at work to find police cars outside the gates, workers standing around whispering in shock. Her heart began to race as she hurried inside. An officer stopped her and asked, "Are you Maya R?" She nodded, trembling. He said, "We need to ask you a few questions. There have been reports that you have been stealing materials from the foundation. Her knees went weak. She shook her head quickly. No, that is not true. I would never. He handed her a folder filled with papers, fake invoices, fake receipts, all with her name on them. Her hands trembled as she stared at them. Someone had planted it all. Someone wanted to destroy her. Daniel rushed out of the mansion as soon as he heard. He looked furious but still composed. He told the officers that Maya was innocent, that someone was trying to frame her, but the damage was already done. Rumors spread fast through the city within hours. The story was everywhere. The newspapers said that the new foundation's manager had stolen money, that the project was built. Online, Maya watched the headlines in disbelief, her heart breaking with every word. The workers she had trained looked confused, some even afraid. She could see doubt in their eyes, and it hurt more than anything else. Daniel tried to reassure her, telling her to stay calm, to trust him once again. But this time trust felt impossible. She could not understand how everything had gone from light to darkness so quickly. She sat in her room that night staring at the same uniform that once gave her pride and whispered to herself, "Maybe I was never meant for good things. Maybe I was just lucky for a moment." She packed her small bag slowly, her movements heavy and tired. The city outside her window was silent. Her eyes burned with tears. She thought of leaving quietly before sunrise, disappearing before Daniel or anyone else could stop her. She told herself, it was better this way, better to run than to drag him down with her. She wiped her tears and whispered, "I will start again somewhere, far away where no one knows my name." But as she was about to zip her bag, her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and saw a message, unknown number, but only one line: "Don't run. Wait until dawn. You will understand everything." Her breath caught in her throat. It had no name, no signature, but somehow she knew it was him. Daniel, the same calm tone, the same strange patience. She sat there, frozen, the clock ticking slowly in the silence. Her mind was a storm of fear and hope. She wondered what he meant. Would he clear her name? Or was this another trap? Part of her wanted to believe in him, but another part whispered that believing again would only break her more. She sat by the window, watching the dark clouds gather outside, the wind rising. Like a warning, the night felt endless. She hugged her knees close, whispering prayers into the quiet room. Please let this end. Please let the truth come out. Hours passed until the first faint light of dawn touched the edge of the sky. The city slowly, waking from sleep, the sound of birds faint in the distance. Maya's heart pounded in her chest. She stood by the door, her bag still open on the floor, when suddenly there was a sharp knock. It made her jump. She froze, staring at the door. Another knock, louder this time, then another. Her hands shook as she walked closer. She whispered softly, "Who is it?" But there was no answer. Only silence. And then a familiar voice on the other side, gentle, steady. "Maya, open the door." She gasped. It was Daniel's voice. Her heart raced. She turned the handle slowly, and the door opened to a sight that made her breath catch. Daniel stood there, not alone, but surrounded by several people. Behind him were the police chief, a few reporters, and some of the workers from the mansion, all looking serious and tired. Daniel looked at her with soft eyes and said quietly, "You should not have to hide anymore." Maya, she could barely speak. "What do you mean?" He smiled faintly and said, "I told you the truth. Always wins. I found who framed you, and I made sure everyone else found out too. The reporters have the real story now. By the time the sun rises, the world will know you were innocent." She covered her mouth as tears fell her body, shaking from relief and disbelief. Daniel stepped closer and handed her a small velvet box, saying softly, "It is time you received your gift." Maya opened it with trembling fingers, and inside lay a golden key shining under the morning light. "This key," he said, "opens the doors of the new foundation, the one you will lead starting today. The truth is out, and the place belongs to you now." She could no longer hold back her tears as the sun finally rose, bathing the room in golden light. The same dawn that had once filled her with fear now filled her with hope. She thought she had been fired, but she was only being prepared for something far greater.